James Schneider is a former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. First of all, on this idea of US troops, do you see that as, in any world, a possibility?
Well, it's not going to be a possibility under this government, but that doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do at all. I personally don't think we should have any foreign bases from any country and foreign troops permanently stationed in our country. I think it is a breach of sovereignty. And I think that's the case in general terms. Now, when we look at the specifics of Trump, John Healey had to go out at the weekend and say that US military bases on British soil wouldn't be used for any future attack on Greenland. And the question is, how are you going to enforce that? The problem with our military relationship and our foreign policy relationship with the United States is it's one not of equals. We are pathetic, but it's not just we're pathetic in front of Trump, as Gavin Newsom says. I think we're structurally pathetic. We're tied into spending money that goes to US military corporations rather than to our own. Our foreign policy is not our own. We're dragged into wars which are unpopular at home, disastrous abroad, make us no safer, and we do that because of the US. It makes us less democratic, and I think fundamentally less secure.
You talk about a breach of sovereignty. If it is ultimately deemed to be in the UK's interests, whether militarily, perhaps financially, diplomatically, to have US or any other troops here, is that not just a sovereign decision made by a country that believes it's in their interests?
It could be, but let's look at the actual reality, which is the US can do things on our territory that we have no say-so over and things that we would oppose. Things that perhaps our political class would oppose, but certainly things that our public would oppose. Then when you look at the question of economic support, I mean, you were seeming to suggest that the US is a great boon for the UK economy in some way. I don't understand that at all. If you look at the UK stock exchange, for example, 57.7% of the shares are owned by overseas investors. The largest bulk by far of that is by US investors. Mm-hmm. That means that when British workers and businesses do well and make money, a big chunk of that goes across the Atlantic, not to us, but to prop up the balance sheets of US companies.
But I guess the investment being made by Americans aids those workers in being able to do jobs in businesses that are functioning and doing well and have capital behind them.
It depends how much rent is going out. But then if you look at the investment, the so-called investment that the government is trying to welcome in from US American asset management companies like BlackRock, these are not even investment into UK firms. These are taking stakes in UK infrastructure in return for rents. They are basically, by definition, not infrastructure. They're buying assets for which we will have to pay rent into the future. We need to re-examine our entire relationship because it is clearly not serving us. If we are in a position where a huge amount of our economy is not owned by us, so we can't really have very much say over it, where our military spending has to be increased because the US demands it, and the vast bulk of that increase will go to the US. Let's have a look at European, including Britain, arms imports recently. Mm-hmm. They have increased from 2020 to 2024 by 155%, a whopping increase. And almost 2/3 of that has gone to US companies. Sure. We've been buying stuff from the US. So when Trump says we need to spend more money, what that means is his donors in the US military industrial complex get a payday. I don't see how that makes us any safer.
But if we are to rid ourselves of this one-sided relationship, jettison US troops out of the United Kingdom, do you agree that we would have to spend more on military? Whether it's from US companies or UK or European, and I take your point about onshoring some of that spending, we're going to have to do that.
Not necessarily if you look at how much waste there currently is in a lot of things that we spend money on. Let's take, for example, the F-35.
I thought you were going to go for the welfare bill there, James, but probably not.
Well, if you take the F-35 program, right, which is US designed mm-hmm. and US controlled aircraft, we're committed to buying dozens more of mm-hmm. them at enormous cost, despite significant delays and the availability and mission capability far below targets. Those are in the words of a National Audit Office mm-hmm. report from last year, which noted that the lifetime cost of this program was, wait for it, £71 billion. The MOD's original estimate, less than £19 billion. So the National Audit Office described this as a disappointing return, which seems to be...
But we will need more military investment, again, whether it's American or otherwise. If we cannot rely on US as a safe and secure military partner, we're going to need to do this ourselves, or at least in conjunction with European allies and other allies across the world.
We'll have to stand on our own 2 feet. The question of whether that will actually cost us more money, I think, is entirely open if you look at the waste. I've just given you the F-35 program. Let's take another huge expenditure, Trident. We don't have an independent nuclear weapon system. Trident is, and Keir Starmer basically let the cat out the bag yesterday and said this, we need the US for Trident. We don't own the missiles. We have so-called operational independence, which I think is language which is doing political work that the missiles themselves probably can't. There hasn't been a successful test launch in over a decade, and the lifetime cost is estimated at now over £200 billion. There's clearly enormous waste in the current arrangements, which is taking money out of our economy and putting it into someone else's. Also happens to be, the most corrupt industry in the world, the US military-industrial complex, and isn't making us any safer, isn't giving us capabilities. We saw the other day when the US went into Venezuela that it could just shut off their air defense systems. Can they do that to us? Can they do that to us because we have interoperability through NATO? There is a lot of things here which, if we're being really serious about security, and I think when Zach Polanski said that we need a real strategic defense review, I think that is quite right. Looking at what are the actual real threats to being so integrated with US power, which under Trump is incredibly erratic and sort of mind-bendingly noxious and aggressive, but that is just the most visible form of long-standing US policy. If you look at the illegal wars we've been dragged into, if you look at this huge expenditure which I'm pointing out, which is wasted money, if you look at the degree to which US capital owns British companies, these are all things which are going on before Trump. Trump just says the quiet part out loud and he invoices loudly.